other part. Academia, government service, from law firm, state attorney general. All these were men back then who had some common sense and judgment. Remember, Earl Warren was the governor of California. What was his qualifications? He was a political appointee. And they brought in a sense of reason, experience, independence, and they changed the world in ways that's never been done before. It's important to have judges on the Supreme Court, but it's not required. And I think she, is the youngest an independent member of the court, will bring a breath of fresh air about what really happens in the world. I mean,
Judge Rehnquist, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, was not a judge before he was appointed to the Supreme Court.
Not even Rehnquist, Justice Brandeis, Justice Felix Frankfurter, Justice Lewis Powell, who was an important justice. There's a whole list of people who came on and made an important difference.
Do you know Alabama Senator Sessions?
I do, and there are a lot of African Americans in Alabama who support him, and he supports them. I'm a little saddened by his level of inquiry, because I think that he has a right in the advice and consent prong of the Constitution to oppose someone for any reason without giving a reason. But I think to sort of characterize Elena Kagan as anti-military is just not true. And I think her full record is not reflecting what's being discussed in the hearings today.
He was quoted in Talking Points memo, Senator Sessions, comparing Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision that allows even more corporate money to flood into politics, with Brown v. Board of Education. Can you comment on that? You've written extensively about Brown v.
I can only comment on it and say I hope people read both opinions and see how much off base that is. If he says there are points of departure, that's true. Brown changed 60 years of segregation in 1954 after the Plessy case in 1896, and Citizens United unfortunately changed a generation of Supreme Court decisions, limiting the impact. It ignored the important McCain-Feingold effort to try to limit money influencing results. And I don't think we have one principle that's clear: one person, one vote. To what extent should money now influence decisions as opposed to the people decide who they want to support? I think Citizens United is a troubling decision, and I think it's going to have another day in court, whether it's now or later, when the court gets a chance to re-examine it and the impact it's going to have on making elections less fair than they have been in the past.
I want to play a clip of constitutional law attorney and Salon.com blogger Glenn Greenwald. These are some of his reservations about the Supreme Court nominee, Elena Kagan, that he expressed on Democracy Now!
She's somebody who has managed to avoid taking a position on virtually every single issue of importance over the last 2 decades. And in order to know what the impact of a Supreme Court nominee will be, it's important not only to assess them in isolation, but also relative to who they're replacing. And there's a very substantial likelihood that Kagan is more conservative than the justice she's replacing, which is John Paul Stevens, which means even if she's a relatively decent person and a good Democrat, the effect that she would have very likely is to move the court to the right. But I think the real issue is we know virtually nothing about what she thinks about anything. She's managed to remain a totally blank slate. She has no experience, not even just not as a judge, but even in a courtroom. I mean, prior to becoming Solicitor General, she was barely ever even in a courtroom participating in any cases before judges. And so it's hard to see how she's going to have the respect of or a good rapport with the other justices on the court, given that her learning curve is going to be so steep. So given all the other excellent alternatives that Obama could have chose, I think this is really quite an atrocious pick, though it remains to be seen if in the confirmation process we learn more about her one way or the other.
By the way, Glenn Greenwald did tweet after the first days of the confirmation hearings that he's a little more positive about Elena Kagan. But Professor Ogletree, your response?
I'm not surprised he's a little bit more positive, because he's learned something that he didn't know before. And to say that she doesn't have any judicial experience and that she's a danger. I actually have the same comments about Justice David Souter. As law professors, we have unlimited First Amendment rights. We can say anything about anybody, anytime. And I said he was a stealth candidate. He was going to be a clone of then Senator Sununu, and that there was a problem. And then I argued a case before the Supreme Court when he was there, death penalty case in 1990, and he just stared at me the whole time. Do you know what? That was the first opinion he wrote in the favor of my client, James Ford in Georgia, reversing a death penalty conviction. And what did I say about Justice Souter after hearing and seeing what he's doing? The most thoughtful, fair, experienced, brilliant scholar ever, right, on the Supreme Court. So we just don't know. And Elena Kagan doesn't know what kind of justice she's going to be, but I tell you this, she'll be smart, she'll be independent, she'll fit right in, she'll know the law, because they said she wasn't ready to be a dean, but she changed our law school. They said she wasn't ready to be the Solicitor General. She'd never argued a case before the Supreme Court or any appellate court. She's done a tremendous job as the first woman Solicitor General. She's going to be a superb Supreme Court justice. And she's 50 years old. She's going to be there probably longer than anyone currently on the court. She has a long time to define where her ideology is going to be. We won't know in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. She may not know. But she definitely is going to be a plus on this court, and I think we should applaud the fact that President Obama had the foresight to appoint a young, independent, aggressive, thoughtful, incredible, and brilliant candidate to the Supreme Court.
You're his special counsel. Did you recommend her?
I supported her very strongly because I thought she had a lot to add. There were other talented people as well that I thought would be great. There are African-American women that I thought would be great.
Like?
I'm not going to mention the names because they weren't nominated, and I don't want them to be hurt if there's another opportunity. And there are also other progressive lawyers, more progressive than Elena Kagan, no doubt about it. But the question is, can they clear the hurdle through the Senate? Perhaps not. She can, she will, and she'll do a great job.
Well, we'd like to turn from Kagan to your latest book. And today, the Cambridge Police Department is scheduled to release the results of an independent review of the arrest of leading African-American Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr. by a white police officer last year. The incident made national headlines and sparked a debate on race relations that reached all the way to the White House. The review panel was convened to provide lessons learned from the arrest and provide guidance for possible policy changes. The report's findings are scheduled to be announced this afternoon. Gates was arrested on July 16, 2009, inside his own home after police responded to a report of a possible break-in and entering at his house in Cambridge. On the 911 call, the woman told the dispatcher she saw two men try to barge into a home, but said she had no idea if the two men were breaking in.
17 Ware Street. It's a house. It's a yellow house. Number 17. I don't know if they live there and they just had a hard time with their key, but I did notice that they kind of used their shoulder to try to barge in, and they got in. I don't know if they had a key or not because I couldn't see from my angle. But, you know, when I looked a little closely, that's when I saw.
Hispanic. Are they still in the house?
They're still in the house, I believe, yeah.
Are they white, black, or Hispanic?
Well, there were two larger men. One looked kind of Hispanic, but I'm not really sure.
It turns out Gates had forced his way into his own home, overcome a jammed front door. When the police arrived, Gates reportedly presented his proof of residence and said, "This is what happens to black men in America." He was then handcuffed and taken into custody. Cambridge police dropped a disorderly conduct charge, but the arresting officer, Sergeant James Crowley, rejected Gates's call for an apology.
A week later, President Obama held his fourth primetime news conference at the White House. It was mainly focused on health care, but in the last question, the president was asked what Gates' arrest had to say about race relations in America.
I don't know, not having been there and not seeing all the facts, what role race played in that. But I think it's fair to say, number one, any of us would be pretty angry. Number two, that the Cambridge police acted stupidly in arresting somebody when there was already proof that they were in their own home. And number three, what I think we know separate and apart from this incident is that there is a long history in this country of African Americans and Latinos being stopped by law enforcement disproportionately. And that's just a fact.
A few days later, Henry Louis Gates appeared on CNN and said his arrest had sensitized him to the vulnerability of people of color to racial profiling.
But what it made me realize was how vulnerable all black men are. how vulnerable all people of color are and all poor people to capricious forces like a rogue policeman. And this man clearly was a rogue policeman.
The story continued to make front-page news as the Cambridge Police Department backed Sergeant Crowley's refusal to apologize and criticized the president for saying they had acted stupidly. Obama eventually invited both Crowley and Gates to the White House for beers in what became known as the Beer Summit. At a news conference afterwards, Crowley said he was seeking to look forward.
This was a positive step in moving forward as opposed to reliving the events of the past couple of weeks in an effort to move not just the city of Cambridge or two individuals past this event, but the whole country to move beyond this. I think what you had today was two gentlemen agree to disagree on a particular issue. I don't think that we spent too much time dwelling on the past. We spent a lot of time discussing the future.
We're going to get comment from Charles Ogletree, more than comment. He was the counsel to Professor Gates throughout the incident. We're going to go to break and come back. Stay with us.